The dusty wind carried whispers of a secret that would change everything. But Florence Rhodes didn't know it yet, as she stood outside the general store in White Pine, Nevada, clutching a crumpled piece of paper she couldn't decipher. The summer of 1876 had been unforgiving, painting the landscape in shades of brown and gold, and she had arrived in this town just 3 days ago with nothing but the clothes on her back and a burning desire to start fresh after her father's passing. At 22 years old, she felt older than her years, weathered by hardship and loss, but there was still a spark in her green eyes that refused to be extinguished. The general store's door opened with a jingle, and a tall cowboy stepped out, his worn leather boots scuffing against the wooden planks. He was maybe 25, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck and eyes the color of strong coffee. Benjamin Irving had been working at the nearby ranch for 3 years, and he knew most faces in White Pine, but hers was new and troubled. "You need some help there, miss." His voice was warm, touched with concern rather than pity. Florence looked up, startled, her fingers tightening around the paper. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and she fought the urge to simply walk away. But something about his gentle expression made her pause. "I received this from the land office," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "They said it's important, but I cannot read what it says." Benjamin stepped closer, careful not to invade her space, and held out his hand. "May I?" When she nodded and passed him the paper, he scanned it quickly, his brow furrowing with concern. "This is a notice about your father's property claim. Says you have 30 days to prove you can work the land, or it reverts back to the territorial government." The color drained from Florence's face. 30 days? But I just arrived. How am I supposed to prove anything in 30 days? "The land office doesn't usually give much consideration to circumstances," Benjamin said, handing the paper back. "But if you're willing to put in the work, I might be able to help. I know farming and ranching, and I've got some time in the evenings." Florence searched his face for any hint of mockery or ulterior motives, but found only sincerity. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." "Maybe that's exactly why," he replied with a small smile. "Sometimes strangers are the ones who help us most. Besides, your father was Edmund Rhodes, wasn't he? He helped my family once when we were passing through California years ago. Never forgot his kindness." Tears pricked at Florence's eyes at the mention of her father. "He was a good man. He always wanted to give me something better than what we had, working other people's land. This claim was supposed to be our new start, but he took ill before we could make the journey together." "Then we'll make sure his dream doesn't die with him," Benjamin said firmly. "I finish my work at the ranch around sunset most days. If you want, I can come by and help you get things in order. We can go over the paperwork, make plans for the land." Florence hesitated, torn between pride and practicality. She had spent her entire life being dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated because she had never learned to read or write. Her mother had died when she was young, and her father had been too busy trying to keep them fed to worry about formal education. Now here was this cowboy, offering help without judgment, and it felt almost too good to be true. "I should tell you something," she said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I cannot read or write. Not just this paper, I mean none of it. Never learned how." She braced herself for the change in his expression, the slight pulling back that always happened when people discovered this about her. But Benjamin's face remained open and kind, and he simply nodded. "Then I'll teach you by firelight," he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "We'll work on the land during the day and your letters at night. If you're willing to learn, I'm willing to teach." Florence felt something crack open inside her chest, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the Nevada sun beating down on them. You would do that, truly. I gave you my word, didn't I? Benjamin adjusted his hat, squinting against the bright afternoon glare. Where's this land of yours located? About 3 miles east, near the creek. There's a small cabin, though it needs work. I know the place. Used to be Henderson's claim before he moved back east. It's good land, got water access, which is more than most can say out here. He glanced at the position of the sun. I'll ride out tonight after I finish at the ranch. You got supplies, food, lamp oil, firewood. Florence's silence was answer enough. Benjamin sighed, but not with frustration, more like determination. Come on, let's get you stocked up. Consider it a loan until your first harvest comes in. They spent the next hour in the general store, Benjamin helping her select what she'd need. The proprietor, a balding man named Gus, watched them with undisguised curiosity but kept his questions to himself. Florence felt self-conscious about accepting Benjamin's help, but he brushed off her protests. Out here, we take care of each other, he said, loading supplies into a borrowed wagon. Plenty of folks helped me when I first came west. This is just how it works. As they rode out to her property, Florence found herself stealing glances at Benjamin. He sat easy in the wagon seat, confident and comfortable, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the area. There was something steady about him, like an anchor in a storm, and she felt herself beginning to relax for the first time since her father's death. The cabin was small and weathered, with a sagging porch and windows that needed new shutters, but it had good bones. Benjamin helped her unload the supplies, then took a walk around the property, assessing what would need to be done. You've got about 40 acres here, he said when he returned. Creek runs through the northeast corner, so you've got reliable water. Soil looks decent for crops, though you'll need to clear some brush. Got a few fruit trees that look like they might still produce. It's workable, Florence. Definitely workable. Hearing him say her name sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. She busied herself arranging supplies on the cabin's rickety shelves. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for this kindness. Not looking for repayment, Benjamin said, checking the cabin's small fireplace. This chimney needs cleaning, but it should be safe to use tonight. I'll bring some tools tomorrow, start helping you fix things up. You have your own work at the ranch. I cannot expect you to spend all your free time here. Benjamin turned to face her, his expression serious. Florence, I meant what I said. Your father helped my family when we needed it most. Let me return that favor. Besides, he added, his tone lightening, I'm curious to see if I'll make a decent teacher. That night, after Benjamin had returned to town with promises to come back the following evening, Florence sat alone in the cabin, listening to the sounds of the desert settling into darkness. For the first time in months, she felt something that might have been hope. True to his word, Benjamin arrived the next evening just as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. He brought a lantern, a slate board, and a piece of chalk, along with more tools for repairs. Thought we'd start simple, he said, settling down on the porch steps beside her. The alphabet first, then we'll work on putting letters together into words. Florence's hands trembled slightly as she took the chalk. I'm afraid I'll be a poor student. I doubt that, Benjamin said gently. You managed to travel all the way here by yourself, deal with the land office, and start making a home in the wilderness. That takes more intelligence than most people have. Reading is just another skill to learn. He began with the letter A, drawing it carefully on the slate and explaining its shape and sound. Florence watched intently, then tried to copy it herself. Her first attempt was shaky and uneven, but Benjamin encouraged her to try again. See, you're already getting it, he said when her third attempt looked much better. It just takes practice. They worked through several letters before the light began to fade too much. Benjamin lit the lantern and hung it from a nail on the porch post, its warm glow creating a small circle of light in the gathering darkness. "That's probably enough for tonight," he said, noticing how she rubbed her eyes. "Don't want to strain yourself. Learning takes time." "Tell me about your family," Florence said, not ready for him to leave yet. "You mentioned they knew my father." Benjamin leaned back against the porch post, his face thoughtful in the lamplight. "It was about 8 years ago. We were heading west from Missouri, my parents and 2 younger sisters. We ran into some trouble near Sacramento. Bandits took most of our supplies and money. Your father found us camped by the road, gave us food and helped my father find work in the area. Wouldn't accept any payment, just said to pass the kindness forward." "That sounds like him," Florence said softly. "He always believed in helping others, even when we had so little ourselves. He was a good man. I'm sorry you lost him." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. Florence found herself studying Benjamin's profile in the lamplight, the strong line of his jaw, the gentle curve of his mouth. He had kind eyes, she decided, the kind that saw people truly. "I should head back," Benjamin said reluctantly, standing and stretching. "Got an early start tomorrow. But I'll be back tomorrow evening and we can continue your lessons." "Benjamin," Florence said as he gathered his things. "Thank you, not just for the lessons, but for treating me like I'm not foolish for not knowing how to read." He paused, meeting her eyes. "You're not foolish, Florence. You're brave. There's a big difference." Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Benjamin would arrive each evening, sometimes bringing fresh meat from a successful hunt or vegetables from the ranch's garden. They would work on the cabin repairs together until dark, then settle down for reading lessons by lamplight. Florence proved to be a quick learner, hungry for knowledge and determined to master each new letter and word. As her reading improved, so did the cabin. Together, they patched the roof, replaced the broken shutters, and built a proper chicken coop. Benjamin showed her how to clear land for planting, how to maintain her tools, and how to read the weather signs in the sky. In return, she cooked meals for them both, simple but hearty fare that reminded Benjamin of his mother's cooking. But more than the practical skills they shared, something deeper was growing between them. Florence found herself looking forward to his arrival each evening, her heart lifting at the sound of his horse approaching. She noticed small things about him, the way he pushed his hair back when he was thinking, the low rumble of his laugh when she made a joke, the careful way he pronounced words so she could learn them properly. Benjamin, for his part, was equally affected. He found himself thinking about Florence during the day while working at the ranch, remembering the look of triumph on her face when she successfully read a full sentence, or the way she bit her lip in concentration when attempting a difficult letter. She had a resilience that amazed him, facing each challenge with determination rather than despair. One evening, about 5 weeks after they'd met, Florence surprised him by reading aloud from a newspaper he'd brought. Her voice was halting but clear, sounding out each word with careful precision. "The territorial governor announced new regulations for homestead claims," she read, then looked up at him with shining eyes. "I did it. I read the whole sentence." Benjamin couldn't contain his pride, his face breaking into a wide smile. "You did more than that. You understood it too." "Florence, you're reading." Without thinking, he pulled her into a hug and Florence wrapped her arms around him, laughing with pure joy. But as the moment stretched, the laughter faded and they became aware of how close they were, how perfectly she fit against him. Benjamin pulled back slightly, his hands still resting on her shoulders. "Florence, I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered in her chest. "What is it?" These past weeks, Getting to know you, teaching you, working alongside you, it's been the best part of my days. You're smart and strong and beautiful, and I find myself thinking about you constantly." He paused, searching her face. "I know it might be too soon, and I don't want to presume anything, but I needed you to know how I feel." Florence's breath caught. She had been afraid to name the feelings growing in her own heart, worried they were one-sided, a foolish hope born of gratitude. But hearing Benjamin speak them aloud gave her courage. "It's not too soon," she said softly, reaching up to touch his face. "I feel it too, this pull between us. At first I thought it was just thankfulness for your help, but it's so much more than that. You've given me not just skills and knowledge, but confidence. You see me, truly see me, and you make me want to be braver." Benjamin covered her hand with his own, turning to press a kiss to her palm. "Then I can court you properly. With your permission." "You have my permission and my heart," Florence said, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and seeking, asking a question that she answered by pressing closer. The kiss was sweet and full of promise, tasting of hope and new beginnings. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Florence laughed softly. "I suppose this means you'll have to keep teaching me. I still have much to learn." "I'll teach you everything you want to know," Benjamin promised, tucking a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. "Though I suspect I'll be learning just as much from you." They sat together on the porch steps, Florence's head resting on Benjamin's shoulder, watching the stars emerge in the vast Nevada sky. The desert night was cool and clear, filled with possibility. "Tell me about your dreams," Benjamin said, his arm around her waist. "What do you want to do with this land?" Florence thought for a moment. "I want to make it productive, prove I can honor my father's memory by succeeding where he didn't have the chance. Maybe grow crops, keep chickens and a milk cow. Perhaps someday have a proper house instead of just this cabin." She paused, then added shyly, "And I want to continue learning, not just reading and writing, but everything. I've spent so much of my life feeling limited by what I didn't know. Now I want to know everything." "That's a good dream," Benjamin said. "And achievable too. We've got about 3 weeks left before the land office deadline. Tomorrow I'll help you draft a letter to them, explaining what you've already accomplished and your plans for the property." "Can you write your name now?" "I've been practicing," Florence said. She retrieved the slate and carefully wrote out Florence Rhodes in uncertain but readable letters. "That's perfect," Benjamin said warmly. "That signature, along with the improvements we've made and a solid plan, should be enough to satisfy the requirements." Over the next few days, they worked tirelessly to prepare everything for the land office inspection. Benjamin helped Florence compose a letter outlining her plans for the property, which she painstakingly copied out in her own hand. They made sure the cabin looked neat and well-maintained, the cleared land was visible, and the chicken coop was stocked with hens Benjamin had bought from a neighboring farm. The land office inspector arrived on a Tuesday morning, a stern-faced man named Caldwell who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Florence's hands shook slightly as she greeted him, but Benjamin's steady presence beside her gave her strength. Caldwell walked the property, making notes in his ledger, examining the cabin and the improvements. He read Florence's letter, his expression unreadable, then turned to her. "Miss Rhodes, this letter states you've cleared land for planting and made significant improvements to the existing structures. I can verify that's true. However, I need to ask you some questions about your plans for this property." Florence took a deep breath and answered each question as clearly as she could, explaining her intentions to plant winter wheat, expand the chicken operation, and eventually invest in livestock. She spoke about water rights and soil quality, things Benjamin had taught her, demonstrating her knowledge and commitment. When she finished, Caldwell was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You've clearly put thought and work into this claim, Miss Rhodes. I'll file a positive report with the territorial office. The land is yours, provided you continue to make improvements and maintain residents." The relief that washed over Florence was so intense she felt lightheaded. Benjamin squeezed her hand, his own relief evident in his smile. After Caldwell left, Florence turned to Benjamin, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I did it. The land is mine. My father's dream is safe." "You did it," Benjamin agreed, pulling her close. "You worked hard, learned fast, and proved yourself. I'm so proud of you." They celebrated that evening with a special dinner, Florence cooking her father's favorite stew recipe while Benjamin built up the fire. As they ate, Benjamin became quiet, and Florence noticed him fidgeting with something in his pocket. "What's troubling you?" she asked, setting down her spoon. Benjamin met her eyes, and she saw nervousness there mixed with determination. "Nothing's troubling me exactly. I've just been thinking about the future, about what comes next." "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath and pulled out a small wooden box from his pocket. "Florence, these past 2 months have been the happiest of my life. Every day I wake up excited to see you, to talk with you, to be near you. You're the strongest, most determined woman I've ever met, and you've got a good heart to match your quick mind." Florence's heart began to race as Benjamin opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring with a small blue stone. "This was my grandmother's ring," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I know we haven't known each other long, but out here, time moves differently. People know what they want faster because life's too uncertain to waste time. Florence Rhodes, would you marry me? Would you let me stand beside you as you build your dreams? Would you share your life with me?" Tears blurred Florence's vision as she looked at this man who had given her so much, who had seen her at her most vulnerable and chosen to help rather than take advantage, who had taught her not just letters and words but confidence and self-worth. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Benjamin, I'll marry you. Nothing would make me happier." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Then he kissed her deeply, and Florence felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They were married 3 weeks later in White Pine's small church, with half the town in attendance. Benjamin's ranch boss, a gruff man named Peterson, stood as his witness while the proprietor's wife, Mrs. Gus, stood for Florence. It was a simple ceremony but filled with genuine joy and warmth. Florence wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Gus had helped her make, and she carried wildflowers that Benjamin had picked that morning. When she walked down the short aisle, her eyes never left Benjamin's face, and the love she saw reflected there made her feel like the luckiest woman in the world. "I never thought I'd find this," she whispered to him during the ceremony when the minister paused. "Find what?" Benjamin asked softly. "Home," she said simply. "Not just a place, but a person who makes me feel like I belong." Benjamin's eyes grew bright with emotion, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, he kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. The reception was held at the general store, with Gus providing refreshments and music from a traveling fiddle player who happened to be passing through. Florence danced with her new husband, laughing as he spun her around, feeling lighter than air. "What happens now?" she asked as they swayed together. "You still have your job at the ranch and I have the homestead." "I talked to Peterson yesterday," Benjamin said. "He's agreed to let me work reduced hours so I can help you build up the property. Eventually, I'd like to leave the ranch entirely and focus on our land. We can make it work, Florence. Together, we can do anything." That night, they returned to the cabin as husband and wife, and Florence marveled at how much her life had changed in just a few short months. She had arrived in White Pine alone, illiterate and grieving, with nothing but a piece of paper she couldn't read. Now she had a home, the ability to read and write, and a husband who loved her for exactly who she was. As they lay together that night, Florence traced the lines of Benjamin's face in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Tell me about your dreams now," she said. "What do you want from this life we're building?" Benjamin was quiet for a moment, his fingers trailing through her hair. "I want to build something lasting with you. A real ranch with cattle and horses. I want to see this cabin expanded into a proper house. I want children someday if we're blessed with them. But mostly, I just want years and years of nights like this, with you beside me." "That sounds perfect," Florence murmured, snuggling closer. "Though I have one more dream to add." "What's that?" "I want to help other women like me, ones who never got the chance to learn. Once I'm more confident with my own reading and writing, maybe I could teach others. Show them it's never too late to learn." Benjamin pressed a kiss to her forehead. "That's a beautiful dream, and I'll support you in it completely. You have a gift for understanding what it feels like to struggle, and that'll make you a wonderful teacher." The following months were a blur of hard work and happiness. Benjamin gradually reduced his hours at the ranch, spending more time developing their property. They planted their first crops, expanded the chicken operation, and purchased 2 dairy cows. Benjamin also brought home a pair of horses, sturdy working animals that made managing the land much easier. Florence continued to improve her reading and writing, devouring every book and newspaper Benjamin brought home. She kept detailed records of their expenses and income, proud of her ability to manage the accounts. She also began writing letters to Benjamin's family in California, starting a correspondence that would last for years. One evening, about 6 months after their wedding, Florence was preparing dinner when she felt an unusual wave of dizziness. Benjamin noticed immediately and rushed to her side. "Are you all right? You've gone pale." Florence sat down carefully, pressing a hand to her stomach. "I'm fine, just felt a bit light-headed. It's been happening the past few mornings too." Benjamin's eyes widened with understanding. "Florence, do you think you might be with child?" The possibility had crossed her mind, but she'd been afraid to hope. "I might be," she admitted. "I've been feeling tired and queasy, and my monthly courses are late." They visited the doctor in White Pine the next day, a kind older man named Dr. Morrison who confirmed what they suspected. Florence was indeed pregnant, probably about 2 months along, with the baby due in early spring. Benjamin was overjoyed, though also nervous about the responsibility of fatherhood. Florence felt a complex mix of excitement and fear. She had lost her own mother young and had no sisters or close female relatives to guide her through this process. Sensing her worry, Benjamin held her close that night. "We'll figure it out together, just like we've figured out everything else. And Mrs. Gus has already offered to help when the time comes. You're not alone in this, Florence." "I know," she said, placing his hand over her still flat stomach. "I'm just in awe of it all. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this life. Now we're going to be parents." "You're going to be an amazing mother," Benjamin said with conviction. "You're patient, kind, and determined. Our child will be lucky to have you." The winter was mild that year, which was fortunate as Florence's pregnancy progressed. She continued to work on the property as much as she could, though Benjamin insisted on taking over the heavier tasks. He was protective without being overbearing, understanding that Florence needed to feel useful and capable. As her belly grew, Florence finally felt confident enough to offer reading lessons to other women in the area. She started with just 2 students, young wives from neighboring homesteads who had never learned their letters. They met once a week at the cabin, and Florence discovered she had a natural talent for teaching, breaking down concepts into manageable pieces and celebrating each small victory. "You're making a real difference," Benjamin told her after one of these sessions, watching her students ride away looking proud and accomplished. "Those women are going to have opportunities they never had before, all because you were brave enough to share what you learned." Florence glowed at his words. Teaching others had given her a sense of purpose beyond just managing the homestead, and she loved seeing the same spark of realization in her students' eyes that she remembered feeling when things finally clicked for her. When spring arrived, painting the desert in unexpected blooms of wildflowers, Florence's time grew near. Dr. Morrison warned them to be prepared, as first babies could be unpredictable. Benjamin refused to leave the property, arranging for a young ranch hand to cover his remaining duties so he could stay close to Florence. The labor began on a warm April evening, just as the sun was setting. Florence had been feeling cramping all day but hadn't mentioned it to Benjamin, not wanting to worry him unnecessarily. When her water broke, though, there was no hiding it. Benjamin immediately sent for Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Gus, then helped Florence into bed, trying to hide his own nervousness. "You're going to do fine," he said, though his voice shook slightly. "You're the strongest person I know." "Stay with me," Florence gasped as another contraction hit. "Please don't leave." "I'm not going anywhere," Benjamin promised, gripping her hand. "I'll be right here the whole time." The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Gus took turns monitoring Florence's progress, while Benjamin remained at her side, wiping her forehead with cool cloths and whispering encouragement. Finally, in the early afternoon, with one last tremendous effort, Florence gave birth to a healthy baby boy. His cry was loud and strong, filling the cabin with sound, and when Dr. Morrison placed him in Florence's arms, she burst into tears of relief and joy. "He's perfect," she breathed, studying the tiny face, the small fingers that gripped her own. "Benjamin, look at him. He's absolutely perfect." Benjamin, who had tears streaming down his own face, could only nod, overwhelmed by the sight of his wife and newborn son. "What should we name him?" Florence looked up at her husband, then back down at the baby. "Edmund," she said softly, "after my father, Edmund Irving. Is that all right?" "It's more than all right," Benjamin said, his voice thick. "It's perfect. Edmund it is." The weeks following Edmund's birth were exhausting but wonderful. Florence marveled at how such a tiny person could completely reorganize their lives, but she wouldn't have changed it for anything. Benjamin proved to be a devoted father, taking over most of the household tasks so Florence could rest and recover, walking the floor with Edmund when he was fussy at night, changing diapers without complaint. One night, about a month after Edmund's birth, Florence found Benjamin sitting in the rocking chair by the window, holding their sleeping son, bathed in moonlight. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly, coming to stand beside them. "Everything," Benjamin said, his voice full of wonder. "How a chance meeting outside a general store led to all this. How you trusted me when you had no reason to. How we built this life together from nothing but determination and hope." Florence rested her hand on his shoulder. "I think about that too. About how my inability to read that paper turned out to be the greatest blessing of my life because it led me to you." "Do you ever regret it?" Benjamin asked, looking up at her. "This life. It's hard out here, especially now with Edmund. Do you ever wish for something easier?" "Never," Florence said firmly. "This life has meaning, Benjamin. We're building something real, something that will last. And we're doing it together, which makes even the hard parts worthwhile." As Edmund grew from infant to toddler, the property flourished along with him. Florence's reading lessons expanded to include 6 regular students, and word of her teaching spread throughout the region. Benjamin successfully established a small cattle operation, purchasing a dozen head and breeding them carefully. The homestead became profitable, allowing them to make real improvements to the property. When Edmund was 2 years old, they finally had enough saved to begin expanding the cabin into a proper house. They added 2 bedrooms, a larger kitchen, and a sitting room, transforming the simple structure into a real home. Florence hung curtains she'd sewn herself and filled shelves with books, creating a warm and welcoming space. She also continued her own education, reading everything she could find. Benjamin brought home books on agriculture, history, literature, and science. They would spend evenings reading aloud to each other, discussing ideas and theories, their minds growing together as their family had. "Sometimes I can't believe how much has changed," Florence said one evening as they sat on their expanded porch, watching Edmund play with a wooden horse Benjamin had carved. "5 years ago, I couldn't write my own name. Now I keep detailed account books, correspond with people across 3 territories, and teach others to read." "You've worked hard for every bit of it," Benjamin said, pulling her close. "You never gave up, even when things were difficult. That's what I admire most about you, Florence. Your determination." "I had a good teacher," she said, kissing his cheek. "One who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Their life together fell into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch grew steadily, their reputation for quality cattle spreading. Florence's reading circle became a regular institution, meeting every week at the house, which was now known as the Irving Place. Women would ride in from miles around for their lessons, and Florence took pride in each student who successfully completed the program. When Edmund was 4, Florence discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Benjamin was just as attentive, but less nervous, having been through it before. Their daughter, Grace, was born on a cool October morning, arriving quickly and with less drama than her brother. She had Florence's green eyes and Benjamin's dark hair, and Edmund was fascinated by his new baby sister, wanting to help with everything. "Our family is complete," Florence said as she nursed Grace, watching Benjamin help Edmund practice writing his letters. At 4 years old, Edmund was already learning to read, and he took his lessons very seriously, wanting to be just like his mother. "It's more than I ever dreamed of," Benjamin agreed. "A thriving ranch, a beautiful family, and a wife who still makes my heart race when she smiles at me." Florence laughed. "Even after all these years, especially after all these years," Benjamin said, coming to sit beside them. "Because now I know every facet of you, and I love each one." As the children grew, the Irving Ranch became a cornerstone of the White Pine community. Florence's reading program expanded to include children from neighboring homesteads, creating the area's first informal school. She taught not just reading and writing, but also arithmetic and basic science, passing on the knowledge she had gained through her own dedicated study. Benjamin served as a mentor to younger ranchers in the area, sharing his expertise on cattle breeding and water management. Together, they built a legacy of generosity and community support, never forgetting how lost and alone Florence had been when she first arrived in Nevada, how Benjamin's simple offer of help had changed everything. On their 10th anniversary, they hosted a celebration at the ranch, inviting everyone who had been part of their journey. The house rang with laughter and music, children playing in the yard while adults shared stories and food. Mrs. Gus cornered Florence in the kitchen, helping her prepare more refreshments. "You know, I remember when you first arrived in White Pine," she said. "You looked so lost, so uncertain. Look at you now. You've built something remarkable here." Florence glanced out the window at Benjamin, who was showing Edmund and Grace how to rope a fence post, their faces bright with concentration and joy. "I had help," she said simply. From you, from Benjamin, from this whole community. Nobody builds a life alone. Maybe not, but you did the work. You could have given up when things were hard, but you kept going. That's what made the difference. That night, after all the guests had left and the children were asleep, Florence and Benjamin sat together on their porch, just as they had so many times before. The desert stretched out before them, vast and beautiful under a canopy of stars. "What are you thinking about?" Benjamin asked, the same question he'd asked countless times over the years. "I'm thinking about that piece of paper I couldn't read, the one from the land office," Florence said, lacing her fingers through his. "At the time, I was so ashamed, so embarrassed by my ignorance, but that piece of paper brought me to you. It was the beginning of everything." "I remember exactly what I said to you that day," Benjamin reflected. "You told me you couldn't read or write, and I offered to teach you by firelight." "And you did," Florence said softly, "but you taught me so much more than just letters and words. You taught me that it's never too late to learn, that mistakes and limitations aren't permanent, that accepting help isn't weakness but wisdom. You taught me what love really looks like, not in grand gestures but in patient repetition, in showing up every day, in believing in someone even when they don't believe in themselves." Benjamin pulled her closer, emotion thick in his throat. "You taught me just as much. You showed me what real courage looks like, what it means to face your fears and push through them. You reminded me why my family came west in the first place, to build something meaningful, to help others, to create community in the wilderness." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the familiar sounds of their ranch settling into night. The cattle lowing in the distance, the horses shifting in the barn, the soft rustle of wind through the new trees they'd planted around the house. "Do you think we'll always be this happy?" Florence asked, a question that held no fear, only wonder. "I think we'll have challenges ahead," Benjamin said honestly. "Life always brings changes and difficulties, but I also think we've proven we can face anything together. That's not going to change." "Together," Florence repeated, savoring the word. "That's the secret, isn't it? Everything is possible when you're not alone." As if to punctuate her words, they heard a small cry from inside the house. Grace had woken from a dream. Together, they rose and went inside, Benjamin checking on Edmund while Florence soothed Grace back to sleep. Standing in the doorway of their children's room, watching Benjamin tuck the blankets around Edmund's sleeping form, Florence felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. This was what her father had dreamed of when he filed that claim, this sense of permanence and belonging, of having something solid and real to pass on to the next generation. The years continued to roll by, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. They weathered droughts and hard winters, celebrated births and mourned deaths in their community. Benjamin's parents came to visit, finally meeting the woman who had captured their son's heart, and they were delighted to discover a daughter-in-law who was both capable and kind. Florence's reading program eventually evolved into an official school, with the territorial government appointing her as the first teacher for the White Pine District. Edmund grew into a serious, thoughtful young man who loved the ranch and dreamed of expanding it further. Grace developed her mother's passion for teaching and her father's practical skills, able to rope a calf as easily as she could recite poetry. Watching their children grow and thrive, Florence and Benjamin saw their own best qualities reflected and amplified. On their 20th anniversary, they returned to the spot where Benjamin had first offered to teach Florence to read, the steps of the general store in White Pine. The store had expanded since then, Gus having retired and passed the business to his son, but the bones of the place remained the same. "I stood right here," Florence said, placing her hand on the weathered railing. holding that paper, feeling so helpless and afraid. And I walked out that door and saw a beautiful woman in need of help, Benjamin added, putting his arm around her waist. Best decision I ever made, asking if you needed assistance. Best decision I ever made was trusting you, Florence countered. I could have walked away, been too proud to accept help, but something in your eyes told me you were genuine. They walked through town together, greeting neighbors and friends, people whose children Florence had taught, ranchers Benjamin had mentored, women who had learned to read at Florence's patient encouragement. The community they had helped build and strengthen over 2 decades of dedicated work. That evening they hosted a smaller celebration at the ranch, just family and closest friends. Edmund, now 18, stood and offered a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice strong and clear, "who taught us that education is freedom, that hard work pays dividends, and that love is the foundation of everything worthwhile. Everything I am, everything Grace and I hope to become, we owe to your example." Florence wiped tears from her eyes while Benjamin gripped her hand tightly. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile, seeing the values they had worked so hard to instill taking root in the next generation. Later, in the quiet of their bedroom, Florence pulled out an old wooden box from the back of her wardrobe. Inside were mementos from their years together, including that first slate board Benjamin had used to teach her the alphabet. "Look at this," she said, running her fingers over the worn surface. "I can still remember how my hand shook when I tried to write that first A." Benjamin took the slate, examining it fondly. "I remember thinking how determined you looked, how focused. I knew right then you'd succeed at anything you put your mind to. I almost gave up so many times in those early days," Florence admitted. "The letters all looked the same to me, and I couldn't understand how anyone made sense of them. But you were so patient, never frustrated, always encouraging." "Because I believed in you," Benjamin said simply. "And because I was already falling in love with you, though I didn't fully realize it yet." Florence smiled, setting the slate carefully back in the box. "I think I loved you from that first evening on the porch, when you made learning feel safe instead of shameful. You gave me the greatest gift anyone ever has. You gave me confidence in myself." As they lay together that night, Florence reflected on the journey they had traveled. From that frightened young woman with a paper she couldn't read to a respected teacher and rancher's wife, mother of 2 remarkable children, pillar of her community. Every bit of it built on the foundation of that first offer of help, that simple promise to teach by firelight. The passage of time brought inevitable changes. Benjamin's hair started showing silver at the temples, and Florence noticed lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. But their love, if anything, deepened with the years, becoming something richer and more complex than the passionate attraction of their youth. They developed the comfortable intimacy of long-married couples, able to communicate with a glance, to anticipate each other's needs, to find joy in the smallest shared moments. Working side by side in the garden, riding out to check on cattle together, sitting on the porch in the evening with cups of coffee. These simple routines became the texture of their happiness. When Edmund announced his engagement to Sarah, a young woman from a neighboring ranch, Florence and Benjamin supported the match wholeheartedly. Sarah was hardworking and kind, and she clearly adored Edmund. The wedding was held at the Irving Ranch, under a canopy of white flowers, with half the territory in attendance. Watching her son take his vows, Florence was transported back to her own wedding day, remembering how nervous and excited she'd been, how Benjamin's steady presence had calmed her fears. Now here was Edmund, starting his own journey, and she hoped he would find even half the happiness she and Benjamin had shared. Grace, meanwhile, announced her intention to pursue formal teaching certification, wanting to expand on her mother's work. "You started something important, Mama," she said. "I want to continue it, make sure every child in this territory has access to education." Florence could hardly contain her pride. This was legacy in its truest form, not just passing on property or money, but values and vision, a commitment to making the world better than you found it. As Florence approached her 45th birthday, she reflected on how full her life had become. The ranch was prosperous, supporting not just their family but Edmund and Sarah as well, with plans to expand further. Grace had returned from her training and established a proper school in White Pine, with Florence serving as an assistant teacher. Their family now included 2 grandchildren, Edmund's sons, who were the lights of Florence and Benjamin's lives. Benjamin, now nearing 50, had slowed down slightly, letting Edmund take on more of the heavy ranch work. But he still rode out most days, checking on the herds, maintaining the property, finding satisfaction in the physical labor that had defined most of his life. One evening, as they watched the sunset from their porch, their usual evening ritual, Benjamin turned to Florence with a thoughtful expression. "You remember what you said on our 10th anniversary, about that piece of paper being the beginning of everything?" Florence nodded, curious where he was going with this. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," Benjamin continued, "about how the smallest moments can change the entire trajectory of a life. If I had walked out of that store 5 minutes earlier or later, if you had been too proud to ask for help, if I hadn't known your father, everything would be different. But none of those things happened," Florence pointed out. "We met exactly when we were supposed to, and we made the choices that led us here." "That's just it, though," Benjamin said, taking her hand. "We made choices. It wasn't just fate or luck. You chose to trust me. I chose to help. We both chose every day to build this life together. That's what I want our grandchildren to understand, that love isn't just a feeling, it's a series of choices, repeated over and over." Florence leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable and content. "You're feeling philosophical today." "Maybe a little," Benjamin admitted with a chuckle. "But it's true, isn't it? Every day I choose you, and every day you choose me. That's what's kept us strong all these years." "Every day," Florence agreed softly. "Through good times and bad, through struggles and triumphs, I'll keep choosing you, Benjamin Irving, until my last breath." They sat together as the stars emerged, one by one, the same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their love story all those years ago. The desert stretched out before them, no longer harsh and forbidding but familiar and beloved, the landscape of their shared life. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of family, Edmund and Sarah putting their boys to bed, Grace working on lesson plans for her school. This was the life they had built from nothing but hope and hard work, and it was more than either of them had dared to dream. As the years advanced, Florence and Benjamin settled into the comfortable rhythm of grandparenthood and semi-retirement. Edmund ran the ranch with skill and innovation, expanding into horse breeding and expanding their cattle operation. Grace's school flourished, eventually including students from as far as 50 miles away, some of whom boarded in town during the school year. Florence continued teaching, though less formally now, focusing on adult students and special cases. She never turned away anyone who wanted to learn, remembering too well what it felt like to be denied knowledge. Benjamin spent his days maintaining the property, mentoring young ranchers and spoiling his grandchildren shamelessly. On quiet evenings, they would still take out that old slate board, laughing over Florence's early attempts at writing, marveling at how far they had come. The board had become a symbol of their life together, representing transformation, patience, and the power of education to change lives. When Florence turned 50, the community organized a celebration in her honor, recognizing her 3 decades of teaching service. Students from across the years came to pay tribute, sharing stories of how she had changed their lives. Ranchers' daughters who had become teachers themselves, wives who could now read letters from distant family, women who had started businesses because they could finally manage accounts and contracts. "You gave us more than reading and writing," one former student said during the celebration. "You showed us that it's never too late to change, that limitations we think are permanent can be overcome. You taught us to be brave." Florence was overwhelmed by the outpouring of gratitude and love. "I only did what someone once did for me," she said, finding Benjamin in the crowd. "I had a teacher who saw potential instead of deficiency, who offered patience instead of judgment. I've just been passing that forward." Benjamin's eyes gleamed with pride and love as he watched his wife address the crowd. After all these years, she still took his breath away, not because of physical beauty, though she remained lovely to him, but because of the strength of her character, the generosity of her spirit. That night, as they prepared for bed, Florence was unusually quiet. Benjamin noticed immediately, attuned to her moods after so many years together. "What's troubling you?" he asked gently. Florence was silent for a moment, then said, "Nothing's troubling me exactly. I was just thinking about time, about how quickly it passes. It feels like yesterday that I was standing outside that general store, unable to read a simple notice. Now I'm 50 years old with grandchildren and a lifetime of memories." "Are you afraid?" Benjamin asked, understanding the deeper question. "A little," Florence admitted. "Not of death itself, but of losing this, losing us. I want more years, Benjamin. More sunsets on our porch, more quiet mornings, more ordinary days that feel extraordinary because we're together." Benjamin pulled her close, his own heart tight with the same feeling. "Then we'll make the most of every day we have. We'll keep choosing each other, keep building our life together for as long as we're given." "Promise me something," Florence said, looking up at him. "Promise that no matter what happens, you'll remember how happy we've been. That you won't focus on the ending but on everything that came before." "I promise," Benjamin said solemnly, "though I expect to have many more years of happiness ahead of us yet." And indeed they did. The years continued to unfold, bringing more grandchildren, Edmund and Sarah eventually having a daughter to go with their 3 sons, while Grace married a teacher from Carson City and had twins. The Irving Ranch became a gathering place for the extended family, holidays filled with laughter and love. Florence and Benjamin grew old together gracefully, their bodies aging but their minds remaining sharp. They still read together every evening, still worked side by side in the garden, still found joy in the simple routines of their shared life. When Benjamin turned 60, he finally retired fully from ranch work, passing the operation entirely to Edmund. He didn't mind stepping back, finding satisfaction in watching his son succeed, pride in what they had built together. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," Edmund told him during a quiet conversation. "You taught me everything, not just about ranching, but about being a man, about being a husband and father. You set an example I hope I can live up to." Benjamin was moved by his son's words, seeing in Edmund the culmination of all he and Florence had tried to instill. Hard work, integrity, compassion. These values had taken root and flourished. One spring evening, as Florence and Benjamin sat on their porch watching the sunset, a young couple rode up to the house. They were clearly newly married, travel-worn and uncertain, much as Florence had been all those years ago. "Excuse me, sir, madam," the young man said, dismounting. "We're looking for the Irving place. We were told this is where we might find help." Florence and Benjamin exchanged a glance, both remembering another young couple in need of guidance, another chance to pay forward the kindness that had defined their lives. "You found it," Benjamin said warmly. "Come sit. Tell us how we can help." As the young couple explained their situation, having just taken over a struggling homestead with no experience in ranching or farming, Florence felt the circle closing. They had been these people once, lost and needing guidance. Now they were the ones offering help, passing on the knowledge they had gained through decades of hard work and learning. Over the following months, they mentored the young couple much as others had mentored them. Benjamin taught farming and ranching skills, while Florence helped the young wife, who also struggled with reading, to improve her literacy. It was deeply satisfying work, seeing themselves reflected in these young people, knowing they were continuing a cycle of generosity and support. "This is what it's all about," Florence said to Benjamin one evening after the young couple had left following a lesson. "This is what makes a life meaningful, not what we accumulate but what we give away." "Wise words," Benjamin said, kissing her forehead. "Though I'd say what we've accumulated isn't too shabby either." He gestured to the bustling household, grandchildren playing in the yard, Edmund and Grace in deep conversation by the barn, Sarah preparing dinner in the kitchen. "True," Florence agreed with a laugh. "We've been abundantly blessed." As Florence approached her 60th birthday, she finally retired from formal teaching, though she never truly stopped educating. There was always someone who needed help with reading, always a child who needed extra tutoring, always a new immigrant who wanted to improve their English. Teaching had become as natural as breathing for her, impossible to fully set aside. Benjamin, meanwhile, found satisfaction in writing. He had always kept detailed ranch records, but now he began writing their story, documenting their journey from that first meeting to their current life. He wanted their grandchildren to understand where they came from, the struggles and triumphs that had built the family they were part of. "Read this part," he would say to Florence, showing her pages of his neat handwriting, and she would read aloud, sometimes suggesting changes, other times simply marveling at how he captured moments she'd forgotten. "You make it sound like an adventure," she said after reading a section about their early years establishing the ranch. "It was an adventure," Benjamin insisted. "Maybe not the kind with gunfights and gold rushes, but an adventure nonetheless. We built something from nothing, Florence. That's worth documenting." On their 40th anniversary, their children and grandchildren organized a massive celebration at the ranch. Family came from across 3 territories, friends from decades of community involvement, former students now grown with children of their own. The house and yard overflowed with people, all gathering to honor the couple who had touched so many lives. Edmund stood to offer a toast, his voice carrying across the crowd. 40 years ago, my parents made vows to each other. They promised to stand together through good times and bad, to support and cherish each other. What they didn't know then was how fully they would keep those promises, how their love would become a foundation not just for our family but for this entire community. Grace continued. "Our mother taught hundreds of people to read and write, giving them tools to change their lives. Our father mentored countless ranchers, sharing his knowledge freely. But the greatest lesson they taught was simply how to love well, how to choose each other every day, how to build a life of meaning and purpose." Florence, tears streaming down her face, could hardly believe this celebration was for them. Looking around at all these people, she saw the ripples of that first act of kindness Benjamin had shown her, expanding outward in ways they never could have predicted. When it was her turn to speak, Florence stood somewhat shakily, Benjamin's hand steadying her. 40 years ago, I was a frightened young woman who couldn't read a piece of paper that would determine her future. I had no idea that asking for help that day would lead to all of this." She gestured at the assembled crowd. "Benjamin gave me more than reading lessons. He gave me confidence, partnership, love. He taught me that accepting help isn't weakness and that giving help is the truest strength. Everything good in my life stems from that one moment of kindness." She turned to Benjamin, her eyes bright with love that had only deepened over 4 decades. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself, for choosing me every single day. You are the greatest blessing of my life." Benjamin stood and embraced her, and the crowd erupted in applause and cheers. In that moment, surrounded by the family and community they had built, Florence felt complete satisfaction. This was what her father had dreamed of when he filed that homestead claim, this legacy of love and learning, of hard work and generosity. The years that followed were gentle ones. Florence and Benjamin spent their days in quiet contentment, surrounded by their growing family. More great-grandchildren arrived, and the house echoed with the sounds of multiple generations gathered together. They maintained their evening ritual of watching the sunset from the porch, though now they often had company, grandchildren and great-grandchildren climbing into their laps, asking for stories about the old days. Florence and Benjamin would oblige, sharing tales of when White Pine was barely more than a few buildings, when the ranch was just a struggling homestead, when teaching happened by firelight instead of in proper schoolrooms. "Tell us about when you met," the children would beg, never tiring of the story, and Florence would smile at Benjamin and begin. "I was standing outside the general store with a paper I couldn't read, feeling about as lost as a person can feel." And Benjamin would continue, "And I walked out and saw the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, looking like she needed help." Together, they would tell the story, their voices blending and overlapping as they recounted those early days. The children would listen with rapt attention, learning not just about their family history but about kindness, perseverance, and love. As Florence approached her 70th year, her health began to decline. Nothing dramatic, just the gradual slowing that comes with age. She moved more carefully, tired more easily, spent more time resting. Benjamin, facing his own age-related challenges, stayed close by her side, their roles shifting slightly as he took over more of the daily tasks she had always managed. "I'm sorry," Florence said one afternoon as Benjamin helped her into a chair. "I hate being weak like this." "You're not weak," Benjamin said firmly. "You're tired and you've earned the right to rest. You've spent 70 years fighting and working and giving. Let me take care of you now." Florence reached up to touch his face, lined now with age but still dear to her. "What did I do to deserve you? You trusted me when you had no reason to," Benjamin said simply. "You let me into your heart. That's all I ever needed." Despite her declining energy, Florence remained mentally sharp, still offering advice on the school Grace now ran, still writing letters to former students, still teaching when someone came seeking help. Her spirit remained as indomitable as ever, even as her body began to fail. One evening in early autumn, as they sat together watching the sunset, Florence turned to Benjamin with a peaceful expression. "You know what I'm most grateful for?" she asked. "Tell me," Benjamin said, holding her hand gently. "That I got to spend my life with my best friend," Florence said. "Some people search their whole lives for what we found. We got to wake up next to it every single day." Benjamin's eyes filled with tears. "That's what I'm grateful for too. You've made every day an adventure, Florence. Every single one." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Florence felt at peace, content with the life they had built, secure in the love they shared. "I'm not afraid," she said softly. "Whatever comes, I'm not afraid." "Neither am I," Benjamin said, though his heart clenched at the thought of losing her. "We've had a good life, Florence. Better than good. Extraordinary." That winter was mild, and Florence rallied somewhat, enjoying the holidays surrounded by her vast extended family. The house was packed with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. 3 generations gathered under one roof. Florence moved among them slowly, offering blessings and advice, marveling at the family tree that had grown from her and Benjamin's union. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside and the house warm and bright with candlelight, Edmund asked his parents to sit in the place of honor by the fireplace. The family gathered around, and he pulled out Benjamin's written history, the manuscript that documented their journey. "Dad has been working on this for years," Edmund said. "The story of how this family began, how this ranch came to be. Grace and I thought tonight would be the perfect time to read from it." He opened to the first page and began reading Benjamin's words about that day outside the general store, when a cowboy met a woman in need of help. As the story unfolded, Florence listened with tears streaming down her face, amazed at how Benjamin had captured not just the events but the emotions, the fear and hope and growing love. The reading lasted over an hour, taking them through the early days of courtship and marriage, the establishment of the ranch, the births of Edmund and Grace, the building of the community. When Edmund finally finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. "This is your legacy," Edmund said, looking at his parents. "Not just the ranch or the school, but this story of love and determination. This is what will pass down through generations, this reminder that with courage and partnership, anything is possible." Florence looked at Benjamin, her heart so full she could barely speak. "You did that. You wrote all of that, I wanted them to know," Benjamin said simply. "I wanted them to understand what we built and how we built it. You changed my life, Florence. I needed them to know that." That night, as they prepared for bed, Florence held Benjamin close. "Thank you for writing our story. Thank you for making it a story worth telling." "It was easy," Benjamin said, kissing her forehead. "I just wrote what happened. The story made itself, Florence. We just lived it." Florence passed away peacefully in her sleep on a cold January night, 2 weeks after her 71st birthday. Benjamin woke to find her gone, and though his heart shattered, there was also peace in knowing she had gone gently, without pain or fear. The funeral was the largest White Pine had ever seen, with people traveling from across 3 territories to pay their respects. Former students spoke of how she had changed their lives. Family members shared memories of her kindness and wisdom. Community leaders praised her decades of service. Benjamin stood at her graveside, supported by his children, and spoke his final words to the love of his life. "You taught me that the smallest act of kindness can change everything. You showed me what it means to live with purpose and love without reservation. Every day with you was a gift, Florence. I'll treasure them all until we meet again." In the months that followed, Benjamin struggled with grief, the house too quiet without Florence's presence. But he found comfort in continuing her work, still mentoring young ranchers, still offering help to those who needed it. He finished and published the manuscript of their story, donating all proceeds to the school Grace ran, establishing a scholarship fund in Florence's name. 2 years after Florence's death, Benjamin sat on their porch one evening, watching the sunset alone for the first time in nearly 50 years. He held the old slate board in his hands, running his fingers over the worn surface, remembering that first lesson by lamplight. Edmund found him there, tears running down his weathered cheeks. "Dad, are you all right?" Benjamin looked up at his son and smiled through his tears. "I'm fine. Just remembering. Did you know that when I offered to teach your mother to read, I had no idea it would change my entire life? I just wanted to help." "I know," Edmund said, sitting beside him. "That's what made you both so special. You never thought about what you'd get in return. You just did what was right." "She made everything better," Benjamin said softly. "The world was brighter with her in it." "It still is," Edmund said. "Because of everything she taught, everyone she touched. Her light didn't go out when she died, Dad. It's still shining through all of us." Benjamin lived 3 more years, spending them surrounded by family, sharing stories of Florence, maintaining the ranch and the values they had built together. He passed away quietly in his sleep at the age of 78 and was buried beside Florence under the Nevada sky they had both loved. The Irving Ranch continued to thrive for generations after, passing through Edmund's children and then his grandchildren. Grace's school grew into a regional institution, known throughout the territory for its excellence and inclusivity. The scholarship fund in Florence's name helped hundreds of students pursue education who might otherwise have been denied it. But more than the physical legacy, Florence and Benjamin left behind something more valuable, a story of how love and kindness can transform lives, how it's never too late to learn, how accepting help is strength rather than weakness. Their story was passed down through generations, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires, a reminder that the most important things in life aren't wealth or status but connection and compassion. The old slate board was preserved by the family, displayed in the ranch house as a symbol of where it all began. Visitors would look at it curiously, and someone would inevitably tell the story of Florence Rhodes, who couldn't read or write, and Benjamin Irving, the cowboy who said he would teach her by firelight. They would hear about the love that grew from that simple offer of help, about the family and community that blossomed from it, about the legacy of education and generosity that continued decades after both of them were gone. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Florence and Benjamin were together again, still choosing each other, still building something beautiful, their love eternal as the desert stars that had witnessed its beginning.